Very excited about my next guest. He's Jeremy Corbyn. He's joining us, of course, from the United Kingdom. And there's lots to talk about, especially ahead of a trip that he is planning to South Africa. And let's, of course, now welcome him in the British Parliament. And he's an independent member of Parliament, but previously the head of the UK's Labour Party. Jeremy, lovely to have you. Very good morning and welcome to Cape Town, South Africa.
Good morning, and lovely to be with you. How is Cape
Not
Town this
not your
morning?
first visit to South Africa, I must add. I think you were around about your mid-30s when you were once protesting in front of what was then the former representatives of South Africa's apartheid government, which got you arrested, by the way. And I suppose there the affinity for South Africa really started, a South Africa that is free of domination and apartheid. Looking back now to where we are and in the midst of where we are, there are some, I suppose, very serious conversations that needs to continue to be had, even 30 odd years since you started protesting for a free South Africa.
I'm absolutely looking forward. It's my second visit to South Africa. I came many years ago at the time of the end of apartheid, at the time when Mandela was released, in fact. My late brother used to live in Zimbabwe, and so I went to South Africa then. I first became involved in supporting the freedom struggle of the people of South Africa as a child. My mother and father were very committed to opposing apartheid, and we took part in the boycott of South African goods, particularly after Sharpeville in 1960. I remember my mother describing to me, I was only 11 years old then, what had happened and why we had to stand with the people of South Africa against the regime. And so I was involved through the anti-apartheid struggle for many years, and I'm very pleased to be coming to South Africa again later this month to support the work that's been done by South Africa in taking the genocide case to the International Court of Justice. And I attended the hearing in The Hague of the ICJ, and through my membership of Progressive International, I helped to set up the Hague Group, and we recently had a conference of the Hague countries in Bogota, and we're trying to build the Hague Group to be an even stronger force within the UN, because many things will help the Palestinian people's liberation, and one of them, it's only one of them, it's only a part of it, will be the international legal action that's been taken. And I was very pleased to catch the end of the interview you were just doing with people on the flotilla. And indeed, I've got friends on the flotilla, and I was in touch with them yesterday. I just salute them for their bravery and what they're doing, but I'm just appalled beyond belief at what is happening to the people in Gaza, the killing of 60,000 people and the deaths of so many children from starvation and all the things that are wholly preventable. So just to say that 2 weeks ago, the Peace and Justice Project, which I founded after the last election, held a 2-day Gaza tribunal. The principle was similar to the Russell Tribunal into the Vietnam War. And we had 29 expert witnesses over 2 days, um, explaining to us the legal nature of, or illegal nature of Israel's activities, explain to us the medical situation, the environmental situation, and the future where Donald Trump has this vision of a Riviera in Gaza. And this wonderful group called Forensic Architects gave us a very detailed account of what is actually happening with the Israeli bombing of Gaza and the pattern behind it, of Gaza City, that is, the pattern behind it, which of course fits in with everything to do with the construction of the Riviera plan. So there's a lot of work for us to do. And I'm so looking forward to meeting people in South Africa and to understand the issues facing South Africa and understand the way in which history is played out in South Africa, but also the incredible bravery of those that managed to defeat the apartheid regime. And I was very kindly sent a copy of this book by Amina Kachalia. Um, and I'm just reading it now, and it is a fascinating account of her life, of course, but her life, in effect, parallels the depths of the apartheid regime, and then eventually, of course, the end of apartheid. And so, to me, it's a sort of personal and political history. It's absolutely fascinating.
It absolutely is. And, given how things have changed, at least in South Africa, something like 30 years ago, and when, of course, your mum told you about, the situation in this country, um, you know, the world on our end, has changed, and oftentimes we'll debate whether it's changed for the better. I mean, that's part of the discourse about materially moving on and delivering a better life. Of course, for South Africans. But what clearly hasn't changed, or what hasn't moved, is the freedom for Palestinians. This is, since the Nakba, we're talking, 70 plus years of an occupation that has started in the fallout of a World War II that had seen, of course, the creation of what is today called the State of Israel. And many years on, we see the extent to which the occupation has taken the stranglehold, in the West Bank, and the extent to which we see, of course, now the genocide being committed in Gaza. Many are speculating that this is fundamentally part of this existential crisis that Israel faces, that it is premised on wanting to create an expansion that involves, building this, as Donald Trump puts it, as Riviera on top of the memories and the skulls of Palestinians that have been murdered by the Israelis. And so I want to maybe just understand, according to your reading of where we are at the moment, this idea of, two-state solution, the solution for the Middle East, the way in which Israel is committing and behaving at the moment. What do you think is the game plan here? Is it the full occupation of Gaza, the theft of more Palestinian land, and the survival of an Israel, even at the behest of 600,000 Palestinians having been murdered in 2 years?
I think you've put that very well. The situation facing the Palestinian people now is as bad as it's ever been. It really has. If you read the history of the Palestinian people, this destruction of Palestinian life is appalling, obviously. Go back to Palestinian history, times like the 1936 uprising were, compared to the situation now, relatively good. Then, when the Nakba came in 1948, thousands and thousands died, hundreds of thousands were driven into Gaza, never to return. And indeed, I've met Palestinians in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan, and old people who remember the village they came from. They remember every last detail of the village they came from, never to be able to return. And so the creation of the crisis that's now, it comes from the colonization of the whole region, which is broadly termed the Middle East. I'm not sure it's a very sensible title. I think I'm with those that Edward Said, who described it as Orientalism in the way it was description of it. And then you quite rightly raised the question of where all this goes to in the future. Well, it's not up to you or me to decide what the Palestinian people want to do for the future, or what the configuration of any future will be there. But the priority has to be a ceasefire. The priority has to be the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces from Gaza, the West Bank, the Jordan Valley, and allow the Palestinian people that opportunity to decide their own future and what relations there are then with Israel and the people of Israel. There are there is a substantial Palestinian population within Israel, and a minority, yes, but nevertheless, there are significant numbers of people in Israel that are extremely opposed to the position taken by their government and extremely opposed to the occupation. But I think the priority we have to concentrate on is to end the occupation. Now, you asked about, and quite rightly commented on, the Greater Israel Plan. Well, Netanyahu and the sort of ultra-Zionist ideology that he represents and many of his supporters represent um, does in fact envisage a sort of greater Israel. And going back, remember the 1967 war and the huge expansion of Israel at that time, eventually retreated somewhat, but the plan was to go right down to the Suez Canal and indeed to cross it if they could. And so I think we are in a terrible time for the Palestinian people, but look at it another way. There's never been more understanding and more support globally for the situation faced by the Palestinian people. And knowledge is power and knowledge is empowerment, because that means that the global movements and demonstrations for Palestine are bigger than they've ever been in my memory. And I've been supporting and attending Palestinian demonstrations for all my life, and I've never known the level of understanding and the level of consciousness about Palestine that there is now.
Yeah, and we've seen how the sentiment, it would appear, in the world, certainly has changed. We've seen the rise of, the sort of TikTok generation, the Gen Zs, etc., that are beginning to
Yeah.
question and are beginning to ask very difficult questions. And you've recently started a new political party, together with Zara Sultana and others, and the reading, at least from what I'm understanding, is that this is also a massive swing as a way to take potentially the country in a different direction when it comes to the situation in Gaza, particularly premised on that. And before I get to the new party and certainly sort of the work that you're doing there, your former party that is in government at the moment, the Labour Party, that is always seen to be either centre at best and possibly sometimes left, and we've seen almost a capitulation on some of the Labour Party's previous principles, right? When it comes to the situation in Gaza, not just the posturing towards Israel, but also in the continued sale of arms, for instance, to Gaza. There's also the collaboration with the Israelis, in which British spy planes are continuing to collect intel and fly over Gaza, and that sort of thing. So there's an active collaboration here. There's not a we're sitting on the sidelines and just scared to criticize. They appear to be part of the genocide, and so I wonder what you think that represents, not just of the Labour Party, but of the broader question about Britain's commitment to want to free itself from its former colonial practices.
I think the point you make there is very important because the sale of arms is one thing, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the crucial part from Israel's point of view, Israel's military point of view, is the British military collaboration. There's been, I think, 600 flights over Gaza by the Royal Air Force based in Cyprus at the bases in Akrotiri and Deucalion. And the information collected from all that has been clearly fed to Israel. The government has tried to convince me that this was all to do with the release of hostages, which I find a little odd. I can't quite see why you would need to overfly 600 times to try and locate hostages who were apparently being held underground anyway. Um, that information is absolutely critical. And when, for example, one aid worker was killed, we believe that the RAF knew what was going on and had an overflying at that time and therefore observed the whole incident that went on. And they categorically refused to share any information with the legal team representing the family of the deceased aid worker. That's an example of what is going on. I've asked that the information collected by the RAF be made available to the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court to aid their work in the prosecutions. Again, absolute flat refusal. The sale of arms, which we exposed many times, has been of bombs and other things. They now claim, the British government, that they've stopped the sale of those weapons, but they've maintained the continued supply of crucial component parts to the F-35 jets, which have had such a devastating destructive power over Gaza. So Britain is absolutely up to its neck in all this. And the campaign is to end all arms sales to Israel, but crucially to end the military cooperation. Now, from the Labour Party point of view, Labour had a poor record in opposition of standing up for the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza, and historically did not support the calls being made by us and many other people around the world for a ceasefire. And that led to huge schisms within the Labour Party. And it also led to electoral problems for the Labour Party, in which very large numbers of people either voted for somebody else who were traditionally Labour voters, or just refused to vote at all. And there were a number of people who stood as independents. My issues with the Labour Party were wider than just Gaza, but we'll come back to that. But my other colleagues in the Independent Alliance group, four other colleagues, were elected specifically campaigning on they would be in Parliament supporting the Palestinians and the people of Gaza. Unprecedented for an international policy issue to have such an effect on a parliamentary election in Britain, where traditionally election results depend on domestic issues, usually economy. And this time it's been very different. And so the Labour Party has enormous problems on and still does. And bizarrely, Keir Starmer invited the President of Israel to visit Britain last week. I've no idea what they discussed. There was no effective form of communication afterwards, but the situation is obviously appalling. And so it's international solidarity that is so crucial. I get messages every morning from my good friend, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who I'll be traveling to South Africa with when we go next week. And he sends me a message every single morning. And normally you pick up your phone, you see a message from a friend, and you kind of look forward to reading it. And I obviously look forward to hearing anything from Dr. Barghouti, but every day he just gives me a message about how many people have been killed, how many children have starved to death, or what's going on in the West Bank, where the situation is also very, very difficult. And so solidarity is important. And whilst I fully appreciate that since the end of apartheid, South Africa has had enormous difficulties, particularly over living standards, energy supplies, and all the other things. But South Africa's role on the international stage in taking the case to the ICJ should never be underestimated. And when I was at the court in The Hague, I sat there throughout the hearing. It's a beautiful place, the Peace Palace where the International Court takes place. I was just thinking, South Africa threw off the yoke of apartheid and is now, as Mandela promised, standing up for the Palestinian people.
And look, I mean, there's you say we should never underestimate that, and there's a sentiment back home here about um, well, that was a great, very courageous thing for South Africa to have done, and we were all terribly proud about our countrymen and women, in their legal prowess, just delivering line after line the best, possible legal argument that now we can see what they warned about then, the famine, the, starvation, the lack of aid, the case that they put out that this is a genocide being committed, that we can now see that to the full extent. But there's a question about what really is the impact, even if the court were to make a finding of genocide here. Look, I mean, Israel has until January next year to file a response to the papers that South Africa had filed. But as it stands now, we see a world that's increasingly moving to the right. And yes, I don't want to assume that the world is only just represented by the United States and Israel, but the reality is, in parts of Europe, in parts of Asia as well, we're increasingly seeing a move towards the right, in which there is almost an assault on multilateralism, as it were, to the point where there is almost going to be little to no recognition of even a finding being made by the ICJ. And so the material impact then of that decision to go to the ICJ often comes into question, Jeremy.
Of course, international law is always been an area of vital importance in world opinion, but also an area of incredible weakness because how do you enforce an international legal judgment where when one party absolutely refuses to even recognize the result of the court hearing? Yes, of course it's a problem. But look at it in a slightly broader historical perspective, and I wouldn't be as pessimistic as others about the global effects. The case has had obviously a huge effect on international opinion and drawn attention to the whole concept of genocide and begin to understand what genocide means and that genocide is, yes, the killing of Palestinian people. Genocide was also the colonialist invasion of the Americas. It was also the slave trade. There was so many other things, as well as the more modern genocides, like in Rwanda and Darfur and Cambodia. Um, the Trump administration's willy-nilly imposition of tariffs on many countries, including South Africa, for no obvious or logical reason and not properly negotiated or even thought about very much from what I could see, yes, has had obviously a very difficult and devastating effect on many people's economies, but it's also leading to a political restructuring of the world. The unipolar world dominated by the USA is now absolutely over. There is no unipolar world anymore. We have the United States with a federal debt of $41 trillion, and we have a rival economic power in China, which has no federal debt. It has a thriving and vibrant economy, and obviously is a huge factor on the world stage. Now, I have criticisms of issues in China. I have criticisms of some of their mineral exploitation activities around the world. But you have to recognize there is a fundamental change in the world. And the BRICS group of nations, who are politically actually internally very different, are now a significant lineup on the world stage. Now, you talked about moving to the right. Yes, there is a growth of the most vile right-wing populist racism in Western societies, and we had a whiff of that on Saturday in London when Elon Musk spoke out and sponsored a rally of
This is the
people
flag thing, eh?
flying flags, which
Yeah.
oh, it was disgraceful to behave and disgraceful to messages, disgraceful to scene, thriving on racism. That door has been opened for Tommy Robinson, Elon Musk, and others by the failure of the left parties across the world, and I put that in its broadest sense from sort of centre-left parties around the world, to address the issues of continual falling of living standards of people, particularly in urban areas. And so in Britain alone, we have hundreds of thousands of children living in serious poverty because of a benefit cap, which prevents large families receiving benefits for anything beyond the first two children.
Mm.
And we have a housing policy which essentially is dominated by capital value of land rather than the needs of people to be properly housed. So we have a huge political issue there, which is why I felt after I'd been re-elected last year as an independent that it was important we actually used the experience we had of being elected to do something different. And that's
Yeah.
why I called for the foundation of a new party. We've called it yourparty.uk as the working title. It might end up being that when we have our founding conference. And we just emailed our 750,000 supporters last night to outline the process that we're proposing, which is of assemblies all over the country between now and mid-November, and then the founding conference in November. But it won't be just an electoral force, it will be very much a social force. Having led the Labour Party and spent most of my life in the Labour Party, I realised the problems of a bureaucracy that is more interested in itself than interested in the political success of the whole operation. And so I want it to be democratic and grassroots organisation, but be a force and a factor in the local community. So they won't
Yeah.
just see your party at election time, they'll see your party all the time.
Yeah, we're talking to Jeremy Corbyn. We have just a minute or two left with him this morning, and you're welcome to, of course, get in touch with us via the WhatsApp line on 0786 10 11 12. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, the former Labour Party leader, and of course now an independent MP, and just recently launched a new party. This other party, or Sultana and others, and there was some criticism for. Look, let me start you for here. There's an advisor of yours that I understand is now again being embroiled in anti-Semitism claims. This after suggesting that Keir Starmer could be on the payroll of Israel. I'm not sure if that is exactly what he said, but this is now being viewed as being anti-Semitic. Sultan and others are also saying that Corbynism, which is of course referring to the gravitas that you have and the weight that you have and the appeal that you have, that is great. But there seems to be a criticism that sometimes anti-Zionism has been equated with this idea of being anti-Semitic. I'm certain, Jeremy, this is probably going to be something that's going to be following you now around as you establish this new party, and I wonder to what extent the anti-Semitic brigade argument has taken hold of British politics to the point where a group like Palestine Action, for instance, that is seeking to raise awareness about Zionism and the genocide that's been committed at the moment in Gaza, that anybody wearing a T-shirt, for instance, of the insignia of Palestine Action is being arrested. We have disabled people, elderly folk, for instance, that are being taken into custody. As many as 2,000 people were arrested for wearing insignia of Palestine Action. And so we see this, radical move to create a sort of terror-like campaign around Palestine Action, while at the same time, any sort of criticism that comes from yourself or some other parties, etc., are being deemed as being anti-Semitic. And so maybe on both those fronts, if I could get a response from you on the sort of reaction from the government to the Palestine Action protests, and also whether, criticism of Israel requires tempering in the United Kingdom for fear of it being labeled as being anti-Semitic.
Well, to be anti-Zionist is not to be anti-Semitic. To be anti-Zionist is to challenge the ideology of Zionism, and that is what is driving the occupation of Gaza, what is driving the occupation of the West Bank, and so on. Being anti-Semitic is absolutely, totally wrong under any circumstances. One should never be racist in any form whatsoever. And so I make that very clear division and that very, very clear distinction. The actions taken by the government over Palestine Action itself are absurd at one level, but very dangerous at another level. Palestine Action are a direct action organization that have taken direct action against Israeli arms manufacture in Britain, and a small group of them, only a few of them, got onto an RAF base and put paint on an RAF plane, and put paint in the engine. Apparently, the engine was obviously damaged because of that. They would, under normal circumstances, expected to be charged with criminal trespass and criminal damage. Instead, the government then came up with this suggestion that actually they should now be a prescribed organisation under the Terrorism Act 2000, and therefore would be put in court and tried on terrorism charges. And they're not due to get their hearing in court until January 2027. So we're talking of 15 months away before they even get into court to present their case. The prescription of Palestine action has obviously been opposed by a lot of people outside. It went through Parliament with a huge majority, but a number of us obviously spoke and voted against it. There were more people arrested in one weekend under terrorism charges to do with Palestine action showing of T-shirts and banners and posters than have been arrested over the past 25 years under the Terrorism Act 2000 under charges of terrorism, some of whom were later released anyway. And so we have this sort of height of absurdity of hundreds of police officers descending on Parliament Square to arrest people who included retired lawyers, retired vicars, retired doctors, a lot of elderly people, some in the late 80s and 90s, being helped into police vehicles and then held for a few hours while their cases are processed. The situation is beyond absurd at one level, but terrifying at another because it is criminalizing protest. Now, in the day when we were opposing the apartheid regime in South Africa, the treatment of the ANC and all the people in South Africa was absolutely horrendous by the apartheid regime. But the ANC was not banned in Britain. The ANC operated in Britain, indeed had offices in my very own borough in London, as did SWAPO, South West Africa People's Organisation. And so the attitude then taken by Britain was that it was perfectly legitimate and right that the people of South Africa should be able to have an opportunity to speak out freely in Britain against apartheid, notwithstanding that the Thatcher government did provide support and political support at arms to South Africa. But nevertheless, this country was seen as a place where you could freely speak out. And not anymore, because of the way in which the Terrorism Act 2000 operates and the way in which there's prescription of organizations.
Yeah, and so this is, of course, lots of work to cover there in your country about the assault on freedom of speech and association and so on. Of course, we look forward to your arrival in South Africa and Cape Town, where a lot more of this will be discussed, together with, of course, the focus being on Gaza. But before I do let you go, Jeremy, one of the talking points on the program this morning is around this meeting in Doha, where quite a large amount of Arab and Muslim leaders came together after the attack on Qatar. And while the attack on Qatar, of course, is quite reprehensible, there seems to be a judgment on the, or rather an indictment on the failure of largely Arab and Muslim leaders, to respond in a little bit more adequate way to the genocide being committed in Gaza. What's your assessment here, not just about, I suppose, Arab and Muslim world leaders' failures or shortcomings, but global leadership? I mean, today we're watching it on our screens every single hour. Updates about the extent to which the genocide is taking effect, and I wonder what your assessment is on the supposed world community.
My assessment of the world community, the fabled international community, is that they have desperately failed the people of Palestine, absolutely desperately failed them. Many countries in the world have sent arms to Israel and continue to do so, knowing full well the nature of the occupation and the acts of genocide and war crimes that have been committed, not just recently, but have gone on for a very long time. And the statement that came yesterday from the summit held in Doha. Obviously, what Israel did in attacking Qatar was disgraceful and utterly wrong and totally illegal under any interpretation of international law. But I thought the statement, which had been hammered out over 2 days, absolutely pulled its punches because a number of those countries have signed Abraham Accords with Israel and trade and recognize and cooperate with Israel. Well, surely cooperation with Israel, whilst it is committing acts of genocide and now intensifying those against the Palestinian people in Gaza, required something a bit stronger than what they brought out yesterday. I'm pleased they met together. I'm pleased they at least issued the statement they did of condemnation of the attack and of the occupation. But you've got to follow those very good statements up with some action, and that action has to be economic action against Israel.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you once again for your time here on the Radio 786.